The year is 1921. Place is Nome, Alaska. Today, Nome is a small town in the United States, tucked on Alaska's western coast by the Bering Sea. Wild, icy, and far from everything. Back then, it was even lonelier. In 1921, the land belonged to the United States, bought from Russia in 1867. But for thousands of years before that, it was home to the Inupiat people. The night is cold. A fierce Arctic wind sweeps through the small town of Nome, Alaska. Snow swirls in the air, covering the wooden houses in a thick white blanket. Tonight, the town sleeps, but Ada Blackjack does not. Inside a tiny wooden cabin, a single oil lamp flickers, casting long shadows on the walls. A 23-year-old woman sits on a narrow bed, her hands gently pressing against the forehead of a small boy. His name is Bennett, her only child. His breathing is shallow and weak. His skin burns with fever. Ada's heart tightens. She strokes his thin face with trembling fingers. She has prayed for a miracle, but no one is coming. Ada knows what it means to be alone. She was just a little girl when her mother died. Her father gone too. An orphan, a child with no home. She grew up in Inupiat, her people's blood in her veins. The Inupiat are the native people of northern Alaska, strong and skilled, living off the land and sea for thousands of years, hunting seals, fishing rivers, and surviving the endless cold. She knows some Inupiaq, the language of the Arctic, but missionaries raised her. They taught her English, not how to hunt, not how to survive the wild, cold land her ancestors knew. Now, she feels lost among her own. Ada's eyes drift to the small bag by the door. Her fingers brush it, then pull back. Tomorrow, she will leave Nome. Tomorrow, she will step onto a ship bound for a place she's never seen. Wrangel Island. She doesn't know what waits there. Danger, ice, or worse, but she has no choice. A famous explorer, Vilhjalmur Stefansson, has offered her a job. Seamstress and cook for an Arctic expedition. $50 a month, More money than she's ever held. Money to save Bennett, medicine, food. She exhales slowly. I have to do this. Ada glances at the window, the blackness pressing in. If only he had stayed. Her husband, Blackjack. A man who promised love. But he drank. He wasted their money, and then he left. Alone, she lost 2 babies before Bennett. Now, Bennett is all she has. She pulls in close, whispering, "For you. I have to do this." The wind shakes the walls. The oil lamp flickers. Ada presses her cheek to Bennett's burning forehead. Tomorrow, she steps onto that ship. Tomorrow, she leaves it all behind. Her eyes close, fear and hope fighting in her chest. For Bennett. For a chance to survive. The fire crackles as Stefansson leans over the map, tracing the icy contours of Wrangel Island with his finger. Wrangel Island isolated, untouched, and bitterly cold. It was more than just a frozen landmass in the Arctic Ocean. For centuries, it had been a ghostly presence on explorers' maps, a place few had set foot on. The British had touched its shores in 1914, but never stayed. In 1916, Russia formally annexed the island, though their presence was minimal. Russia had claimed it once, but the war kept them away. The Bolsheviks had bigger concerns than a remote, frozen island. Now, in 1921, Stefansson saw an opportunity. He had spent years arguing that the Arctic was not a barren wasteland, but a land where people could live, even thrive. Others dismissed the idea, believing the Arctic to be a death trap. But he had proof his past expeditions had survived using native techniques, hunting, and adapting to the land. This time, it would not just be an exploration. This was a settlement. The British government had shown interest, but had not fully committed. While they acknowledged the strategic importance of Wrangel Island, they were unwilling to officially fund the mission. The world had just come out of the Great War, and the Empire had more pressing matters. So Stefansson had taken a risk. Some private funding had come in, but much of the cost was coming from his own pocket. It was a gamble, his own wealth, his own reputation, and the lives of the men he was sending. But if they succeeded, history would remember him as the man who claimed the Arctic for Britain. The wind howled against the cabin walls. He reached for his notes, carefully reviewing the details, one last time. Supplies had been arranged. The ship was ready. The team had been chosen. If everything went as planned, Wrangel Island would become a permanent outpost in the Arctic. And maybe, just maybe, the British government would recognize its value. The fire crackled, and a draft whistled through the cabin's wooden walls. A shiver ran down his spine. Perhaps it was the cold, or perhaps it was something else. He pulled his coat tighter and turned back to his notes. The ship, Silver Wave, moves slowly on the dark, cold water. It creaks. The air smells salty and icy. Ada stands by the rail, gripping it tightly. She looks back at Nome. The town's lights grow smaller, then disappear into the fog. Her chest aches a little. She thinks of Bennett's hot face, his soft breathing. She blinks and pushes the thought away. It is September 9th, 1921. A tiny black cat sits by her bag, watching her with big eyes. The wind pulls at her coat, making a quiet sound, like the sea whispering. She adjusts her hood. Her bag sits by her feet. Small, old, all she owns. Someone speaks. First time on a ship. She turns slowly. A man stands nearby. He has light brown hair and a friendly smile. Yes, she says softly. I'm Alan Crawford, he says, extending a gloved hand. Ada hesitates, then shakes it lightly. He seems kind, she nods. Footsteps sound on the deck. She glances over. 3 men stand near the mast. Their breath forms clouds in the cold air. They all look young, perhaps too young for this. Lorne Knight is tall and broad-shouldered. At 28, he's the oldest. He stands firm, as if he is in charge. Fred Maurer stands next to him, also 28. His eyes are sharp. He has been to Wrangel before and got stranded there once, but he waits for Lorne to speak. Milton Gull stands slightly apart. He's thin, adjusting his glasses as he stares at the water. Alan Crawford, the youngest at 20, shifts on his feet, unable to stay still. No other men or women are on the expedition. Fred speaks first. You're Ada. She nods. Yes. Lorne crosses his arms and offers a small smile. What's your job? From Stefanson. Ada's voice is low. I cook, I sew. Milton nods. Good. We'll need warm coats. Fred chuckles. She cooks, she sews, we're fine, right? No one responds. I'm the captain of our team. Alan Crawford says. The air grows heavy as they realize the truth. None of them have the experience to survive the Arctic. Lorne breaks the silence. It's just us. Fred claps Lorne's shoulder and grins. Youngest Arctic team ever, that's us. The words sound bold, but their smiles don't look real. Ada notices. They are afraid. The ship rocks gently. Ada grips the rail tighter and looks past them. A camera sits on a wooden box. Its glass eye catches the dim light. It is there to capture their great achievement. She stares at it. The wind rises, sharp and cold against her face. Milton picks it up. Let's take a picture, he says. All of us, for the new beginning. The men gather close. Lorne stands tall. Fred grins. Crawford stops shifting. Milton holds the camera out. Ada steps in slowly, her hood up. A click echoes. The men laugh softly, then walk away. Ada stays by the rail. She looks at the camera again. Its glass eye stares back. Her heart beats faster. The camera smiles. But only for her. Does it see any future? The galley was warm, the air thick with the scent of simmering stew. The ship groaned softly, shifting with the waves. Alan Crawford sat near the table, absently stroking the small black cat curled in his lap. It had jumped onto him minutes ago, unbothered by the movement of the ship. He ran his gloved fingers along its back, feeling the gentle rise and fall of its breath. "What should I call you?" he murmured. One of the crew members, passing by, glanced over. "Vic," he said. "Victoria. She's mine." Alan nodded. The man reached for the cat, lifting it carefully. Vic let out a small noise, but didn't struggle. The crew member tucked her against his chest and stepped away. The door swung open. Ada entered, carrying a heavy pot of stew. The men continued their conversation, their voices weaving over and around her as she moved between them, ladling the thick broth into their bowls. They took them without a glance, engrossed in talk of ice and provisions, of routes and weather. She set the last bowl down and turned to leave. "Good," Alan said. "Just one word, nothing more." She paused. It was barely anything, barely a moment. The ship rocked, the fire crackled, the men spoke on. She walked back to the stove, the warmth against her back, the cold against the walls. The morning of September 16th was bitterly cold. The silver wave cut through the dark waters, its hull groaning as it neared Wrangel Island. The men gathered on deck, their breath forming pale clouds in the freezing air. The cold was sharp, but something deeper settled into their bones as the island came into view. A year, at least a year. The weight of it pressed down heavier than the ice-laden wind. The ship slowed, rocking in the waves. Wrangel loomed ahead, barren, silent, waiting. One by one, they stepped onto the small boats, bracing against the chill as they rowed toward shore. The first step onto land felt surreal. There was no warmth here, no welcome. Just snow, rock, and an endless expanse of white. Crates were hauled down, supplies passed hand to hand. Food, rifles, tools, everything they would need to survive, or so they hoped. They worked in silence, their movements quick, efficient. No one wanted to linger in the moment, to think too hard about what this meant. The wind howled across the shore as the last of the supplies touched land. The ship was ready to leave. Crew members lingered, exchanging brief words with the team. Some clapped shoulders, some offered quiet nods. One laughed, forcing lightness into the heavy air. "We'll drink for you in Nome," a sailor said, grinning. Fred Morris smirked. "Make it two. We'll need it." Nome. It had been the logical choice for a departure selected by Vilhjálmur Stefansson for its position. The closest American settlement with enough resources and ships for such an expedition. The Arctic had many frontiers, but Nome was its last outpost. A final handshake, a last farewell. Among them, one stood apart, The crew member who had owned Vic stepped forward, cradling the small black cat in his arms. He looked at Alan Crawford, then at the island, and then back. "She be safer with you," he said, gently passing Vic over. Alan hesitated before taking her. The cat settled easily against him, warm in the cold air. The sailor nodded. "Promise me Vic will see her homeland, Nome, again." A thin smile, a hopeful promise. The last boat pulled away, the ship turned, sails catching the wind. The silver wave was going home. The men stood in silence, watching until the ship was a shadow on the horizon, then it was gone. Only the wind remained. Ada lowered her hood, staring at the empty sea. She had left Nome, left everything behind. Now even the ship had left. The land was vast, but she felt smaller than ever, more alone than the island itself. The rhythmic sound of hammering and sawing echoed across the frozen land, breaking the heavy silence of Wrangel Island. The men worked swiftly, their breath visible in the cold air, hands stiff from the relentless chill. Two camps had taken shape, one as their main shelter, the other a storage camp for supplies. The structure stood against the stark white landscape, fragile yet necessary. Ada sat apart, away from the noise, staring at the endless sky. She pulled her coat tighter, lost in thought. A voice muttered from the work site, just loud enough to carry across the still air. "Can't she do anything to help?" Milton Gull sounded irritated. Alan Crawford barely glanced up from securing a crate. His response was calm. "She told us before we left Nome what her job is." "Meow," Vic added from her spot near Crawford's feet, as if agreeing. Ada heard them. A small smile touched her lips as she gazed upward. Nothing could be kept secret here, not on this silent island, where even the faintest words carried across the wind. By nightfall, the cabins were finished. The men stood back, weary but relieved. "All set," Fred Maurer exhaled. "Now we can rest." One by one, they retreated to their beds, seeking warmth in the cold night. The days passed in a slow, steady rhythm. The men built traps, checked rifles, and prepared for the long Arctic nights ahead. Ada spent her time cooking over the small stove, sewing thick fur garments, and mending whatever needed fixing. The cabin smelled of stew on good days, thin broth on others. One evening in late October, as Ada stirred a pot, her voice broke the quiet. "Our food won't last." The men turned. Silence settled over them like the snow outside. From the darkness outside came the distant howl of a fox. A low, guttural growl followed the unmistakable sound of a polar bear. Lorne Knight's fingers tightened around his rifle. His eyes flickered toward the door. He gave a short nod and murmured, "We'll come soon to you." The next morning, they split up, each man heading in a different direction, across the icy terrain in search of food. Ada stood by the small window, Vic curled in her lap. She watched them fade into the white wilderness, one by one. Their figures grew smaller, swallowed by the vast, frozen land. Out there, each man built his own small shelter. A temporary hunting camp. They set traps, waited in silence, tracked what little movement they could find. Days passed. Some nights, Ada was entirely alone. The wind howled against the cabin, rattling the thin walls. She listened for footsteps outside, but none came. Only the distant cries of Arctic foxes and the heavy silence of Wrangel Island. When they returned, they carried whatever they had managed to hunt. Some days, they brought back meat. Other times, nothing at all. As winter grew harsher, their hunger deepened. "Come with us tomorrow, Ada," Fred said one evening, adjusting his coat. "More hands, more eyes." She shook her head. "I don't know how to hunt." Lorne frowned. "It's not hard. You just—" "She stays," Crawford interrupted. His voice was firm. "It's too dangerous. The polar bears are still close." Ada glanced at him. For a moment, she felt something strange, fear and peace, woven together. Days passed, blurring into one another, but there were times when night no longer went out for hunting. On those days, Ada cared for him, ensuring he had food and warmth. One evening, Crawford watched her in silence before finally asking, "You know well how to take care of him?" Ada hesitated before speaking. "My son, Bennett. He was sick, tuberculosis." Crawford nodded slowly, glancing down at Vic, curled near him. "So, you have a reason to return to Nome," he said, his voice unreadable. Then he stood and walked away. Ada watched him go. She didn't know what to say. Months later, a year had passed, a whole year, and still no ship. On some days, Ada would run to Crawford's shelter, her voice trembling. "Why were we chosen? Why only us?" Crawford, leaning against the cold wall, exhaled. "Maybe to cut costs," he muttered. Ada felt her chest tighten as she lowered her head, struggling to hold back tears. Crawford suddenly straightened. His voice was firm, but not unkind. "Ada, go. Go back to the camp. You're not safe here." She looked up at him, startled. "And you?" she asked. Crawford didn't answer. She turned and ran, the wind swallowing her footsteps. Food was running out. Night, growing weaker by the day, had started showing signs of scurvy. He still wanted to hunt, but Ada wouldn't let him. When she kept him in bed, he grew angry, frustrated at his own helplessness. Day by day, his strength faded. One night, as the wind howled outside, Crawford looked at the others and spoke with quiet resolve. "This is our last night here. We three are going." Ada froze, her breath catching. In search of help, Crawford continued, glancing at night, or to find something useful, Anything. Food, fruit, whatever we can get for Night. His gaze lingered on Ada for a moment. No, never, Knight rasped, shaking his head. No, don't go, it won't be safe for you three. Crawford knelt beside him, his voice low but unwavering. The decision is made, Knight. I'm your team captain. Knight had no strength left to argue. Ada lowered her head, not just in sorrow, but to hide the tears slipping down her cheeks. The early morning air was sharp, the sky lingering in twilight. The sun never fully rose this time of year. It merely brushed the horizon with a cold, distant glow before retreating again. Crawford stood outside the cabin, checking their supplies one final time. The wind howled in the distance, carrying with it a weight heavier than the cold. Ada stepped forward, her voice quiet yet firm. Everything will be all right, she said. The prayers of your family will be with you. Crawford exhaled, looking away. But I'm like an orphan, he murmured. Like my son, Ada whispered. He's at an orphanage now. A silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. The door creaked open, breaking the stillness. The other two men entered, their breaths forming pale clouds in the frigid air. We have to go, one of them said, glancing at Knight. Knight lay in his bed, his face pale, his body curled in restless pain. He hadn't stirred. Maybe it was better that way. Slowly, they turned to leave. Before stepping out, Milton handed Ada a small, cloth-wrapped object. For our expedition, he said. Ada unwrapped it slightly, her fingers brushing against the cool surface of the camera. She swallowed hard, nodding silently. Then, Fred met her gaze. He didn't say much, just a simple words. Bye, Ada. Then, he turned and followed the others toward the sled. Crawford hesitated at the doorway, then he turned back. Ada was on the verge of breaking down. Wordlessly, he placed Vic in her arms. His hand reached out, warm, steady. A handshake. He smiled gently, a silent farewell. Ada watched them disappear into the endless white, their figures shrinking against the frozen horizon. The memory struck her, Crawford's first handshake aboard the Silver Wave. By noon, Knight stirred. His eyes opened, weak but searching. Where are they? He rasped. Ada lowered her gaze. They went, she whispered. They went for us. Knight's face darkened. He tried to sit up, wincing from the pain. Why did you let them go? His voice rose. Couldn't you have told Crawford, at least? The anger in his words cut through her like ice. Without a word, she turned and ran, pushing through the cold air, her feet sinking into the snow. She didn't stop until she was far from the cabin, surrounded by nothing but the vast, frozen silence. And then she cried. How do we eat now? Knight asked angrily. Ada, her voice calm but weary, replied. We have some food left. they left some for us. And after that, Knight snapped, his anger unwavering. Ada said nothing. Deep down, she felt a strange relief when his lucidity faded, only for him to return to consciousness moments later. Days passed. Ada took care of Knight as best she could, but his condition worsened rapidly. At times, he lashed out in pain, blaming her. Because of you, they left us. Other times, when he saw her staring soberly at the dwindling food supplies, he would whisper, "Be brave, girl." It was June 23, 1923. Then, one day, a rifle shot echoed through the frozen silence. Knight recognized the sound instantly, his rifle. He looked around for Ada, but she wasn't there. A weak smile crossed his face, despite the pain. "You were brave, Ada." Moments later, she came running back, breathless, her hands shaking. In one hand, she held his rifle, in the other, a bloody fox. But as she stepped inside, the rifle and the fox slipped from her grasp. Vic, the cat, growled. Ada knelt beside her, lifting the cat into her arms. A single tear slid down her face as she whispered, "Knight has finally left us, to the world of peace and hope." She prayed for him, performing the last rites. Outside, near their cabin, she began digging a grave in the frozen earth. Then, with trembling hands, she tried to lift his body, but she was too weak. Defeated, she stumbled back and collapsed beside the half-dug grave, staring at it, unsure of what to do. After a long moment, she stood up and walked to the storage cabin. She returned with several empty supply boxes, arranging them around his body, creating a makeshift burial mound. That day, she ate nothing, but she felt no hunger. Days passed. Ada stayed in the cabin with Knight's body. Eventually, she could bear it no longer, the smell, the weight of death. She moved to the storage cabin, where the stench wasn't as strong. But the storage cabin offered little protection from the relentless cold. With what strength she had left, she sealed the cracks in the walls with wooden planks, broken crates, and scraps from supply boxes. Every movement hurt, but she reinforced the camp as best she could. It was all she had to survive. Every evening, Ada sat by the window, staring at the path Crawford had taken. More days passed. She sat alone, cooking a polar bear. Yes, a polar bear. Polar bears are hard to hunt. But there was no one left to share hunting stories with. Sometimes, she picked up the camera Milton had given her. She clicked some moments, the frozen landscape, Vic curled up by the fire. Just for the sake of passing time, she turned the camera toward herself and took a picture. Maybe the first ever selfie. It was August 20th, 1923. Ada sat on the shore, gazing at the endless ice, lost in memories. Then, a whistle. A ship's whistle. Ada stood up, her heart pounding as she saw the flag of the United States rippling in the wind. As the ship approached, her breath quickened. She read the name painted on its side, Donaldson. The captain stepped forward, removing his hat and bowing his head slightly in respect. "Ada," he said. "Are you Ada?" "Yes, I am." But her eyes weren't on him. She was looking past him, searching. "Crawford?" she asked. "Fred? Milton?" The captain said nothing. She searched his face again. Desperation crept into her voice. "Crawford." His response came like thunder. "They aren't here." A pause. Then someone from the crew muttered under their breath, "Aren't they here?" Ada took 2 steps back unknowingly. The wind tousled her hair, or was it trying to console her? That evening, prayers for night's last rites echoed through the air at the main camp, recited by the entire crew. Before stepping onto the ship, Ada placed Knight's rifle atop the makeshift grave, like a bouquet laid upon a tomb. Silence. Vic was the first to break it with a soft meow. "I don't think she get full payment." "Who was she even taking care of?" a crew member murmured. "Yes, come on, all, back to the ship," the captain ordered. Ada said nothing as she walked away from the cabin, leaving it behind forever. "End of 2 years of survival," she heard someone say as the wind howled around her. As they boarded, the captain spoke again, glancing at Ada. "We tried to come before, but the icebergs blocked our way. We had no choice but to turn back. We didn't think we'd find anyone alive when we returned." Ada didn't respond. Maybe she heard him. Maybe she didn't. Vic let out a small, quiet meow from Ada's arms, as if replying for her.